Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi everyone. We're going to be starting the webinar very soon. It's just going to be a couple more minutes. So you have 2 or 3 more minutes. So grab a snack, grab some coffee or tea, and we'll wait while the others join in. So don't go anywhere. I'll be seeing you in 2 minutes. I think we're going to start the webinar now, and hopefully later on the other participants will join us as well.
No worries.
So, hello everyone. I'm sure by now you have received a lot of messages, texts, or emails from me. and probably we're most likely we already know each other. But for those that don't know me, hi, my name is Bibi. I work as a training consultant with LEORON, and this handsome plant that is lurking in the back is my plant, Sven. He will be joining us as well on the webinar. As you already know, we're almost near the end of our free webinars campaign. If you weren't aware, we have been doing these batches of webinars throughout the months of April, May, and now June as well. And trust me when I say this, that this was one overwhelming and at the same time very humbling experience for all of us at LEORON. You know, it's actually quite funny looking back 2 months from now, and it was such a crazy situation back then. And I think you can all agree with me on this one, that our focus at the time was only on one thing, which is how do we help people not to feel stuck? That was at the priority. How do we help people take their minds off what was happening on the outside? So, as you know, we brought out our best trainers on one side, backed up and supported by the amazing LEORON staff, which resulted in our free webinars campaign. So for today's webinar, we have our trainer, Andrew Webster. He will be my partner in crime in the next 2 hours. Andrew, are you here with me?
I am.
Awesome. You can turn on your camera and join us.
Thank you, Bibi.
Okay, perfect. So after Andrew is done presenting, we will be doing the Q&A part. So please feel free to write at any time your questions in the chat box. You can see it on your right side. So we can answer the questions and we can have a little discussion and answer your questions. So the questions will be reaching me and Andrew as well, and we will try to answer as many as time will let us, of course. So this webinar is also being recorded. So after it ends, you will receive the recording on your emails together with the certificate of attendance. So thank you all for taking the time to be here with us. I'll jump in after Andrew is done with his presentation for the Q&A part. Happy learning, and we'll see each other later. Andrew, please feel free to jump in from here.
Thank you, Bibi, and thank you all for joining us today. On behalf of Bibi and I and LEORON, it's great to be able to present and share this experience, this webinar with you, and also more from a collegiate viewpoint in terms of the risk governance and compliance community getting together. So we can share each other's experience, particularly during this quite a challenging time. But with that challenge also comes a fair bit of reward and opportunity as well. So that's what we're really going to deep dive into today. So today's session, as you can see on the title, is around managing risk within this dynamic environment. There are three main areas that three main topics that we're going to cover off on today. And as Bibi said, please jump in and start putting your questions in the chat box. We will have a really great Q&A session towards the end. In the interim though, it's always great to see what questions are popping up so I can make sure that the information that you guys are seeking is certainly going to be covered. So without any further ado, we'll jump in to the presentation today. So the first topic that we're really going to go through is around understanding the shift in the landscape. So we're going to just quickly go through, what's changed and what does this mean for you? There's been a significant amount of change in the world lately, not to mention, of course, the COVID-19 pandemic that we're going through. That's certainly thrown, as we say, a spanner in the works, or has made it at times quite difficult for a lot of organisations to really start to continue with their existing business model. So that's what I really want to start to unpack with you all today. So when we have a look through, we can really start to see what's actually changing. Now, we've got a couple of subheadings here. So we've got changes in the consumer behaviour, and then we've got changes in the business behaviour. So first and foremost, from a risk point of view, when we start to think about what that risk landscape looks like, we've seen three main changes in consumer behaviour. One is around the workforce engagement and participation. The next is around spending from a consumer point of view in terms of our needs, our wants versus our luxuries. And then we've got investment. So where we're seeing the consumer starting to invest not only from the short term, but also from the long term. When we start to talk about workforce engagement and participation, what I have seen from the companies that I've been working with within the Asia Pacific region is that there's been quite a lot of change within the structure of the existing workforce. So we've seen some companies ask staff to take pay reductions, temporary pay reductions. We've also seen some companies ask for people to take a pay reduction in addition to a reduction of hours. So that workforce engagement has been twofold in terms of organisations going to the staff to say, we need to reduce your hours or we might need to reduce your pay. We're also starting to see a lot of people from the flip side, from the engagement, from the participation side, start to really change how they're working with those organisations as well. We've also started to see, and I'm really keen to understand what you're currently experiencing as well, from a participation point of view, where we've started to see a lot more people start to move from that more traditional full-time employment status into a more structured, permanent part-time basis. We've also started to see some people move from an engagement model where you come to work from 9 to 5 or from 8 till 4 or from 8 till 6, where we're starting to see that change in behaviour being driven by, well, it's not the time that I'm at work, it's the value and the work that I do. That started to have some really interesting conversations in terms of, I don't need to come into the office anymore because I'm restricted to work from home, or I'm in isolation, working from home or working remotely. So it's not about the hours that I do, it's more about the value and the work that I do. That's been a really interesting shift in the paradigm, because we're traditionally, business has traditionally been built on, you come into work, you work your core hours, and what work gets completed gets completed. Where we're starting to see the shift that's really sort of come to fruition now through the new generation requesting more flexibility, more say on their engagement within the workforce and within organisations. We're also seeing it more of that value-driven conversation to say, yes, you pay me for my time, but you pay me for the work that I do. That's been quite interesting, and we're starting to see that become more of a topic that we're having with our leaders, with our executive and our management team, particularly having driven through the COVID experience. The next one that we've got there down there is around spending. So when we're talking around changing in consumer behaviour, we've had, when COVID really started to drive and it started to become less isolated out of Wuhan and started to affect a lot of other countries, we started to see a really sharp shift in consumer spending. And a lot of that spending was really tightened up in terms of, let's focus on what we need to focus on. Let's focus on our needs and not our wants and not our luxuries. Because at that stage, we didn't know what exactly we were dealing with. And we didn't, of course, know what the timeline looks like. And that's still a variable that we're still working through at the moment, as I'm sure everybody is. Pardon me. So it's been quite interesting to see how that actually has affected businesses. I know the retail sector, the fast-moving consumer goods sector, the luxury item sector, automotive, there's a lot of key sectors that have really taken a hit to their bottom line and to their profit and loss statement, because people have been saying, well, now's not the time to go and take out a new mortgage, to buy a new house, to buy a new car, to go and buy some luxury items. We actually want to make sure that we've got that money, we've got some money saved away, because we don't know how long this is going to last. Linking in with the workforce engagement and participation model, there's also been a really a tighten in discretionary spending, because there's also been that people worried about what their job looks like in terms of, will they be asked to take a pay cut? Will there be a potential reduction or redundancy of their role? That's also been quite interesting. The last point that we have here is around investment. So what that looks like, I've got in there some examples of short-term to long-term examples. We've started to see some atypical behaviour that we see during these critical incidences. The key example of that is, people taking money out of their money out of the share markets across the globe. There's been a bit of a fight or flight mentality around what this looks like, and there's been the reduction that we've seen in spending, in consumer spending, has led the stock exchange and the value of the dollar fluctuate. When there comes that fluctuation, people can get concerned that they're going to lose their gains, so they'll take the money out of the stock markets. We know that playing in the stock markets is a long-term strategy for a long-term gain. So it's also been interesting to see where people have been taking their money out from that long-term investment and what they're doing with it from a short-term point of view. Some people have just been putting it in, putting that money into the bank. At the moment, the banks aren't really driving a huge amount of interest. So I'm quite interested to see what that's going to look like and what we're going to start to see from that consumer behaviour over the next couple of months as COVID really starts to contract and we start to really to beat the virus itself. The next part that I just wanted to quickly go through is around the changing in business behaviour. So there's a couple of bullets that I want to work through with you today. One is around the question of, is your business in a holding pattern? I work with a number of organisations, as I said, within the Asia Pacific region, and a few organisations that I've heard of talking to colleagues as well, is that some businesses have almost gone into a bit of a holding pattern. And we use the term holding pattern similar to when planes have to go into a holding pattern before they land, where there's been some quite aggressive, some very optimistic and fantastic growth strategies that organisations have had. However, now that we've got some uncertainty driven on by the virus and by COVID, Corona, some businesses have almost said, let's just stop, let's go into a holding pattern so we can wait to see what's happened and where this is going to land. So that brings to the next point in terms of the level of capital investment, whether that be for CapEx and OpEx. So some organisations, as we previously spoke about, have been asking for some staff to take some pay cuts and some reductions in benefits. I know that the big four accounting firms, so Deloitte, PwC, KPMG and Ernst & Young, have, with their partners and with their staff, have also started to reduce bonuses, short-term incentives and the like back to equity partners and also to some of their staff as well. So where they're starting to move and decrease a lot of that OpEx, we're starting to see a bit of a holding pattern into what that looks like from a CapEx point of view, where there are a number of instances where there's been some organisations that were looking to expand either through a new product line, enter a new market, or physically expand into a new jurisdiction or geography where that hasn't actually taken place yet, because they're unsure as to what that's going to look like once we start to come out the back end of the coronavirus. My question for you guys, and please use the chat box facility that Bibi mentioned at the start. Have you started to see this from within your business, or within your organisation, or even with your clients in terms of a pause or that holding pattern being implemented as a result of the coronavirus? I'll give you a couple of minutes if you can just pop your message in there. I'm going to keep it all anonymous. I won't call out any names, but I'm just really keen to understand where you sit and what you're seeing. So feel free to click back on that chat box into the message area that says type message here, and we'll see what you guys come back with in a minute or two. Don't be shy, guys. So the question is, have you observed a decrease in OPEX and CAPEX, or operating expenses and capital expenses, as a result of COVID-19 within your organisation, with your clients, or even within your supply chain? Bibi, are you seeing any comments come through from your side?
Yes, I keep on getting questions. I think some people have trouble writing the questions, but they are reaching us. So that is actually the chat box, the message box, the one that you're writing. So yes, the questions are getting to us.
Okay, great. I'm just having a little bit of trouble seeing them at the moment. That's okay. Can you, whilst I'm just trying to work this out, Bibi, can you throw me some comments that people are coming back with, please?
Yes, just give me a second. Okay, so here we have one question. It says, in our company, we have seen a lot of challenges in terms of investment behavior. A lot of planned projects have been put on hold. The capital investments have been reduced by 40%.
Wow.
Yeah, so I figure that is quite the impact.
Yeah, which is interesting because that actually leads into the next bullet point around the decrease or postponement of non-essential projects. I'm working with a large financial institution currently within Australia, and they're also going through a bit of a prioritisation assessment of projects. One of the largest banks in Australia had approximately 300 projects on the go. They were through various stages of ideation, design, implementation, and review. And they put a lot of their projects, almost 90% of those projects, on hold because they weren't sure on what the landscape, the general business landscape was going to look like during COVID and post-COVID, let alone that risk landscape as well. So 40% is certainly a large, significant amount. There have been some organisations that have gone more, and there'll be some organisations that will have gone less than 40%. That said, it's going to be interesting to understand when those projects and those CAPEX or the capital initiatives are reviewed, to what degree are they likely to remain the same and the business case remain the same pre-COVID versus after COVID? We're seeing that there's, particularly with this one bank that I'm mentioning within Australia, there were all these multiple little projects of work that were required from various parts and various business units. Talking to other colleagues who work within the project risk environment, there's talk that a lot of those smaller projects are going to be taken back up to the board, back up to the various governance forums to be captured, recalibrated, and almost reassessed as to their requirement, their necessity, their impact. What is this going to look like realistically? And asking the fundamental question of, well, if we could do without it then, do we still need it now? And if we still need it now, what are we going to change about it? And so where this organisation had these 300 odd projects, there's been essential projects, a very, very small number that they've kept. And that's just around, so some of those projects will be the IT security upgrade, upgrade to the digital platform, to the customer experience, etc. So it's going to be very interesting. And from one risk professional to another, I highly recommend that you keep abreast and you keep your finger on the pulse to understand what that looks like within your organisation. Because I'm expecting to start to see a more harder, a more robust, a more detailed business case assessment process for the increased capital expenditure and also for reoccurring ongoing operational expenditure, whether that's inside or outside of projects. The other components that I want to mention today are around organisational restructures and the parents to the entity relationship. So from an organisational restructure point of view, with the potential decrease in funding from that CapEx and OpEx point of view, and also understanding that we're in this time of uncertainty, many organisations have taken this opportunity to start to restructure their organisation. Some organisations have used it to really trim the fat, as they call it, where they've just sort of gone through and said, well, we've got 10,000 full-time employees, we've got the budget for 8, and it turns out that once we've started to stop and reassess what our core function and what our objectives are, we're going to stick with 8,000 people. So they're starting to really refine what that structure looks like. We're also starting to see a lot of organisations start to shift, and we're seeing them start to pivot in terms of how are we servicing our customers? What is our purpose, and how are we achieving our strategy? It's been quite a change where we've started to see over time this concept of purpose-led design start to really drive what organisational structures look like. We're going to talk a little bit later on around what this looks like from that governance, risk and compliance point of view, around the 3 lines of defence and the business partner model. But it's going to be challenging for some organisations to keep up with post-COVID life in terms of their organisational design. So if we strip it back to basics, we've got some organisations that are quite hierarchical. We've got business unit specific organisations or the matrix model. We're going to start to see, we've started to see, and we're really starting to see that Silicon Valley, that IT lean startup company model start to expand over more traditional business models. Another large bank within Australia is redefining their organisational strategy to be around the customer and purely around the customer. The customer's always been at the heart within finance, but when you look back, you could question to say, well, the customer's at the heart, but the profit and the profit making is driving the decisions. Now we're starting to see this purpose-led design to say, well, let's put the customer at the very top and structure the organisation around to make sure that we can fully service and maximise and build our relationship with the customer, and then maximise what comes of that, which we would commonly see as profit and as equity. I'm starting to see some of those questions come through now, which is great. I've just got some comments. Yes, some projects have been deferred and staffing levels have been reduced. What I've also seen, just in terms of to comment on that staffing level reduced, is where we've seen some parts, and this has happened to a colleague of mine. They've gone through one department that was the risk department within this organisation, and they've started to reduce the numbers. But what they've done is, where they've had, say, 20 staff within this department, they've reduced the staffing numbers to about 12, but they've gone out to market and have refilled some of those existing roles. So where they've had 20 and they've gone to 12, they've actually decreased or lost or reduced, say, 15 of those existing personnel and gone out to market to recruit new personnel and new staff members that either have more experience, more bespoke backgrounds, more specialities, or areas of expertise. So this staff reduction component doesn't necessarily always reflect in the unemployment statistics, because there's been a lot, whilst we're seeing a lot of people stay in roles where they normally would have moved because of the uncertainty and they want that level of security, we're also seeing it's a really tight and aggressive labour market for candidates that are really skilled, that are professionals, and that really understand their why. So they understand what drives them and how they make a difference in the workplace. So it's been quite interesting where we've seen, particularly within the contractor space or the short-term engagement space, where there's been a lot of movement around a lot of key critical projects because they're still in high demand. Their demand has almost increased because of the organisational restructures. So they'll want someone who can come in and who can project manage and who understands risks and who can understand scheduling, and they can get that in one person. So they'll go out and even pay more for that one person because it means that they can have a reduction of 3 people within the business. That certainly has pros and cons. So we're starting to see a lot more movement from a risk point of view. What does that mean for us? Well, succession planning that we'll touch on very shortly is certainly up there. Key person risk, where you've got the reliance or sole reliance on one person and their knowledge, is certainly up there. We've also got that level of movement will also affect morale, so how people are feeling at work. If there's a lot of movement within the workplace, then we're going to start to see people being unhappy and start to move. With a lot of movement will come a loss of IP or intellectual property. So that's also a concern or a risk that we should be thinking about. The other part is around the parent and entity relationships. So I've got in here, for example, capital, returns and shareholders. We're starting to also see globally a lot of companies start to decrease what their dividends are going to be back to their shareholders. We're also starting to see some parent companies start to increase capital injections into some of the other organisations within their organisational structure or their entity structure to make sure that they're shored up, essentially, to make sure that they can be sustainable through this period, through this challenging period of COVID, so that they can come out the other end and continue to operate. We also talk about what else is changing, and what else is changing is also our people. Whereas we're seeing an increase attention on balance, and we often talk about this concept of work-life balance. Now, there's a lot of conjecture and a lot of it's a bit of a paradox in terms of, well, how do you balance work and life? They're interchangeable, they dovetail together. What does this look like? We're starting to see a lot more people say, well, I want to spend more time at home. I want to spend more time with my family. We jump down to the next bullet around caring responsibilities. In Australia, the children were asked to stay home during the large gap of COVID. So what that meant is that parents have had to homeschool their children, supported from the school, but parents and workers have had to work from home in addition to have their children at home. We've also had a lot of people sort of locked down within family bubbles and family units. So we've had extended family, we've had uncles and aunties and grandparents, nieces and nephews, etc., come into our own individual bubbles that we've had responsibilities for. That change in relation to the organisational restructure is starting to show with people coming back to say, I'm employed on a full-time basis, I work 40 or 45 hours a week, more or less, but I want to call out the importance of making sure that we're going to start to see, and we've started to see already, those people that were working excessive hours come back and start to push back to say, I can't do 60 hours a week anymore, it's not feasible. Or I can't do any more. Some people work more than that as well. That's going to have an impact on not only productivity and efficiency, but also deliverables in terms of how we can stick to that strategy as well. So my ask is to take that away and to think about, once we start to get back into the office, we start to get back into the cities, start to observe what that change looks like. And there's going to be some positives from it, and there'll also be some negatives from it. Think about from that risk lens, what does this mean and how is this going to impact our organisation from achieving its objectives? We talk about the individual prioritisation shifts, so how we spend our time. Working from home has been interesting from my point of view. I wake up at a normal time, and instead of my commute, my 45-minute drive into the city, I log straight onto work. I have lunch, but I don't take a lunch break and go outside because I'm working from home. It also comes around 5 o'clock and I still stay logged on because that 45 minutes that I would normally take to drive home, I continue to work. So it's interesting that I believe, and I've been informed, that my productivity is increased because I'm spending more time in the office, but I've also been having less distractions. Meetings start on time because we're doing them all via video conference, and you don't have someone coming over to you asking you questions or interrupting you. So that's been a positive side of that. It's going to be interesting to see where we've got that individual prioritization shift. So how we choose and how we want to spend our time, that has started to change, and that will continue to start to change. There's been some fantastic surveys going around online, particularly on LinkedIn, around, do you want to work from home still? Do you want to come back to the office? Do you want to work a hybrid model of both? Jack Dorsey of Twitter came out recently, I believe, to say to his staff, if you want to continue to work from home, go for it. That's absolutely fantastic. We've started to see a lot of that old school mentality of you have to be in the office at your desk to be working. That's really been debunked because we've been able to prove you can work from home. Some people struggle, some people will always struggle. Some people don't work well from home through various reasons. And that's part of the organization's organics, which our organizations and managers and leaders will need to work through. People leaders will need to work through with their staff where they can and cannot work from home. We will start to see more people say, I'm going to work from home 1 day, 2 days, 3 days a week on a permanent basis. And we're also starting to see some roles being advertised and filled as remote workers. When we start to talk about procurement, so around the labour market, contracts and employment, the big difference here is going to be where we've had traditional remote or offshore labour markets that are now no longer necessarily seen as, let's outsource our call centre to India, let's outsource our call centre or our contact centre to China, Korea, the Philippines, etc. That's, whilst I've seen a lot of businesses, particularly in Australia, move a lot of their call centres and back of office functions offshore to more cheaper labour markets, the whole output and feedback from COVID has been, we can all work remotely. We can all successfully work remotely. So what will that mean for you? Will that mean that there is potential that a lot of the existing organization structure remains onshore? Or will we start to see a lot more of it moved over into those markets that are offshore that have a more attractive line item on the profit and loss? So will we start to see more development opportunities coming out of the likes of India, Pakistan, and the Philippines, where the labour market has traditionally been cheaper? Will we start to see a lot more back of house roles, so finance, IT, human resources, marketing, advertising? Will we start to see a lot more moved into that domain for those cost saving measures? There's opportunity and there's risk there. The opportunity is obviously for the organizations that have set up there already. The opportunity is also for new organizations to set up. We could also start to see a real big shift in even the cost modeling from our existing offshore partners, knowing full well that they have a bit of an upper hand to say, well, we can do this for you. We've been doing this for you for a number of months. For us to continue to do this, we're going to need to increase our prices. That's going to be watch this space. We talk about workers' health and safety, or work health and safety. With a lot more of us working from home, that doesn't negate our management and our executives' responsibility for our health and safety whilst we're at work. There's been a lot of people working from home that have not had the same ideal ergonomic desk, chair setup that we have within a normal office. If someone is injured at home, depending on the legislation, work is still responsible to help that person recover through rehabilitation and other medical expenses. I've flagged with the Chief People Officer of the company I'm working with at the moment to say, what are we doing to support our workers who are working remotely to make sure that we're reducing our insurance liability? So we've got some really great information on the intranet about the new ways of working, what that looks like, and also everyone's own responsibilities in terms of looking after their own health and safety. Fraud activities is certainly quite a challenge within this environment. Being seen and being heard has certainly had an effect. A colleague who's a partner at one of the large accounting firms who looks after fraud and fraud disputes has certainly seen an increase in activities and cases being referred to them for further investigation within the corporate environment. We see, he said that he's seen a lot of examples of behaviour that normally wouldn't exist within the workplace, but because you're not technically in the workplace, in the office, that has affected some people's perceptions. And also not having someone constantly, around you or over your shoulder, some people have certainly taken advantage of what that looks like. And we'll touch on that when we talk around data and the IT environment. The last one to quickly go through here is around maintaining regulation adherence to policies and procedures. Working from home presents some different challenges where we might not necessarily follow all of the company's policies and procedures as we normally would if we were in the office. From a risk and compliance point of view, that's really important to start to have those conversations now with your managers, with your management team and the teams that you support, to make sure that people aren't taking shortcuts. Because we might see some of the results of the shortcuts now, but more than likely we're going to start to see a lot of those, the negative results over the next couple of months. Now, some of those shortcuts may be easy to fix, and others may actually involve, regulatory intervention, litigation. So we want to make sure that even though that we're working technically from our home office, that we're still following the same processes and procedures. That's really vital. So I just want to quickly jump in now around the digital risk environment. Just provide some context in terms of what we're seeing. So what we are observing So VPN, or the virtual private network access for remote workers, volume and capacity is certainly two key areas. We have organizations set up with VPN access, whereas at times, because of licensing costs, organizations say may run with 25–30% VPN access for critical staff, and the rest of the staff will always come into the office, and they will work off the LAN or work off the network there. Working from home has certainly been a big challenge, where a lot of organizations have really had to sprint to make sure that they've had sufficient access to the IT network for all of us to work remotely. That's put some pressure on data protection and data loss mechanisms as well. So what we've started to see is people getting a little bit sort of sloppy, people not following, as I said, those processes and procedures, and there's been from what's been declared, a small spike in data loss incidents around privacy and around the GDPR. Again, highly encourage, have the conversation with IT, have the conversation with the teams and the executive you support to ask the question, with our teams working remotely, what are we seeing in terms of data loss or privacy breaches? How are we currently tracking and identifying these? And what does that look like? How are we going to fix it? I sent an email out recently, organizational wide, reminding everyone around the do's and don'ts. That was a really quick educational reminder, guys, this is what you need to do. Sometimes, more often than not, those little reminders really help people to, oh, that's right, I need to make sure that if I'm going to be sending a personal email, I need to swap computers and move to my work computer or to my home computer. We'll touch on that when we talk about boundaries. Cyber threats, there's been an increased number of phishing attacks that have been occurring around the world. We're seeing a lot more targeted, very specific phishing emails in particular being sent to a lot of different organizations, particularly within the finance sector, within the healthcare sector. A little bit around government, but more so around the for-profit organizations. Again, strangely enough, our behaviors change, and IT report that more people are clicking on the links than what we would if we were in the office. I'm not sure where the psychology comes into it, but people feel less required to follow those processes and procedures. They're also making decisions that they wouldn't make in the office whilst they're working from home. So they're following some of those links, and those phishing activities and the Trojan and malware is actually becoming more effective because people don't use the same processes that they would when they're in the office. Delegations and authority. So have they become more strict or have they become relaxed? We start to see, and I'm keen to understand from you guys on the line as well, have you started to see more delegation made to you during this time, particularly under COVID? Have you started to see your managers and your manager's manager start to give you not only more work, but more authority? Standard governance practice 101 is around having delegations of authority. Who can do what? Who needs to sign off on what level of spending? Who can sign off on a credit card or expenses? Who can sign off on onboarding and recruiting either a new staff member or a new contractor? That's the lines again starting to blur within that environment where working from home has had a little bit of a more relaxed feel. That won't be everywhere, and this won't be applicable to everyone. This is a more generalist statement from what we're hearing from colleagues and acquaintances around the globe. Even talking to my brother in the UK has also said something similar, and his work came back and said, working from home, people don't necessarily dress up in a suit. They don't put on their collared shirt. They don't dress up as if they're going to work. And I read a really interesting article from the Harvard Business Review around that level of psychology. And if people are if people are turning up to work and they're not following that same level of pattern or routine, as in getting up, getting dressed, putting a suit on, going into the city, into the office, getting up, putting on your t-shirt, putting on jeans, stepping into your study, that level of routine is different, and that psychology has changed. And so people have become a little bit, not all people, but some have become more relaxed in the environment, but they're also becoming more relaxed in their role, relaxed around those processes and procedures, and relaxed around that delegation and level of authority as well. So that's also another one to certainly jot down and think about how you would start to build that into a risk profile. The last one here is around the boundaries. So working from home and using work assets for personal use. I'm currently on my personal computer at the moment presenting this. I've got my work PC set up next to me, as well as another device as well. When we're in the office and we're working, if we need to send a couple of quick emails to the kids' school, to the bank, to your accountant, to somewhere else, then we go, okay, I'm quickly going to send an email. I just need to check in really quickly. But now that we're working from home, people are more likely to start to do online shopping. They're more likely to start to look at more sort of social media. But they're not picking up and going to their other device for that process. They're using the work asset. They're using the work laptop. This is where this really dovetails with the increase in phishing and cyber threats, and also around that data loss. We're starting to see people use their work assets for purposes other than what they were given for. What can we do about that? How can we really manage this risk? So one is around communication and education. So let's make sure that all the people understand that their work laptop, their work computer, their work phone are for the purposes of work and for work only, with perhaps limited personal use. If someone's going to start to read the news, by all means, you know, some organizations will let you do that for 10, 15 minutes. But if your organization says no, people will need to be reminded, particularly in this time, you need to jump onto your own device for that process. If you want to do some shopping, you need to jump on your own device. You want to start to do emailing around social activities, you need to jump onto your own device for that. So the last concept that I want to get through just before we jump into some real meaty questions and answers is, well, how do we prepare for what the new normal looks like? We're talking around the new normal because life's never really going to go back to the way that it once was. I certainly don't believe that it will. I would hope that it could potentially, but realistically, it's going to be quite a challenge for that. So we spoke a little bit at the start around the organizational structure and businesses completing restructuring. So particularly from a risk and compliance context, is the organizational structure correct? So there's three components that I wanted to go through here. One is around the business partner model. A lot of organizations now are recruiting and hiring and structuring their workplaces to have a business partner. So we'll have a finance business partner, a risk business partner, a people and culture or human resources business partner. And that individual business partner will be aligned and linked into that specific business unit to provide them that level of support for whatever it is in their remit. So as a risk business partner, I support this program of work regarding the separation or divestment of one part of an organisation into another. I don't necessarily work with other parts of the business, but I don't get into the real nuts and bolts and the daily cogs turning of those other business units supporting my own. Is that still fit for purpose within your organisation? We've got the 3 lines of defence model. Now, most of you should be familiar, I would imagine, with the 3 lines of defence model. Line 1, operational frontline risk. Line 2, providing challenge and oversight. And line 3 is traditionally internal audit. We have spoken before in the past around a 4th line, being regulatory and regulatory audit. That hasn't had enough support to really change from the 3 lines to the 4 line of defence. So we'll stick with the 3 lines of defence. If you work within an organisation that has 3 lines of defence, is that model still current? Is it accurate? And is it working? We've got job sharing as well, where we're starting to see the hybrid model come back of job sharing. Now, I'm not saying job sharing in the ways that Bibi and I share a job. I work 3 days, Bibi might work 2, or vice versa. Job sharing in terms of taking on more than just the existing remit. We saw a shift in the late 2000s where governance, risk and compliance started to get separated into their own individual streams of expertise, where we used to have a governance, risk and compliance specialist or an expert or a manager or senior manager, etc. Then we started to see, no, we're going to have a risk specialist, we're going to have a compliance specialist, and we're going to have a governance specialist. We're starting to see a little bit more now come back, where we're starting to see risk and compliance roles re-advertised. A lot of the roles that I started to observe on LinkedIn and through seek.com and some other recruitment platforms, there's a real impetus or drive to have a lot of those position descriptions inclusive of a broader remit other than just risk or other than just compliance. That's quite interesting in terms of how that's going to help an organisation achieve their strategy, where we're starting to see a more generalist wanted in specific roles other than specialists. We will still see the need for specialists. For example, actuarial or actuaries. That's one key specialist area that we're not going to get that has generally experience within another area or domain of an organisation. People and culture, or the human resources, we're also starting to see that they need to have a broader experience and a stronger business acumen to be able to facilitate their roles better, bigger and stronger. The physical office, the office space and location, we spoke about prioritisation, work-life balance. Flexibility is certainly going to be is going to be one of the key topics. As I said, I'm working with a company at the moment, and they gave back one of the buildings I'm working in to the owner and ceased the lease because we didn't know how long we were going to be working remotely for, and it was quite expensive. There's been a really interesting article, I think it was on Bloomberg.com or a similar a publication out of the US, coming back to say, well, you know, hot desking was the big theme. We all went from individual offices and partition to this big concept of hot desking, where it's just an open shared office. You come into the office, you grab your coffee, you grab your laptop, grab a desk, any desk, and work for the day. Post-COVID, we're starting to see we're now regressing back to having designated fixed offices, having fixed spaces, and even going back to the level of having partitions for our own health and safety, but having those dedicated areas again. What will that mean for you and for your organisation? If your organisation's been set up as a shared office or as a hot desking office, what steps will you need to take to maintain health and safety of you and of your colleagues? There's a big risk around this. A lot of companies, particularly big consulting companies like the Ernst & Young, the KPMGs, and even some big engineering firms will say have a staffing profile of 1,000 staff, but will only have office space or occupancy for 800 because they always expect a certain percentage of the staff to be off-site, to be in the field, to be at clients. That's changed. We're seeing a lot more of people even doing client work remotely. So how will those organisations that don't have enough desks or office space already cope when a lot of those staff technically go back to the office? We also talk about flexible working. I spoke before about how Twitter have said, if you're happy to continue to work from home, continue to work from home. There's some really interesting surveys on LinkedIn at the moment where a lot of organisations, particularly consulting organisations, are seeking your thoughts around how will that work? Do you want to work flexible? Do you want to work fixed days from home? Do you want to work permanent days? Do you want to have flexibility to say, I'm not going to come in tomorrow, I'm going to work from home? How will that look in your organisation, and how will you manage the risks that brings? The last one around here is around activities and applications. So we're seeing, a seismic shift that's similar to globalization. So back when we started to see the full concept of globalization come to fruition, it's argued that it was when Thatcher opened up China to a more robust trade environment then. That was many, many years ago, and we've really started to see the world become smaller through globalization. I mean, I'm currently sitting in Melbourne, Australia. It's after midnight. You guys are either at home, in your office, or commuting, and you've just finished your day over there in the Middle East and elsewhere around the world. So the world's gotten a lot smaller. What I'm foreseeing and what I'm working through at the moment from that risk perspective is this our globalization? Is this COVID going to be one of these defining moments in how we see a giant shift in work, the workforce, and how we complete our work? I think it definitely has the potential to be our generation's globalization experience. I'm not there yet. I'm not fully across all that I need to be able to make that definitive call that this is going to be the big defining moment for us. From what I've seen, from what I've experienced, and what I'm hearing from everyone online and through my network, is that this is going to be a really big shift in not only how we work, but where we work, and the how in terms of technology as opposed to physical location. We're also seeing in the new normal, what does that look like from an investment point of view in staff and in processes? Succession planning is critical. Having the right structure and structuring accordingly is critical. Process improvement and setting ourselves up for success. Again, using that concept of purpose-led design, that's going to be critical to make sure that we can continue to see ourselves through this pandemic and succeed post it. Communication and engagement. So let's think about what's worked well in the past. What has worked well in this crisis? What has the feedback been, and how can we continue to capitalize this? So I would like to ask another question. From a communication and engagement point of view, what have you seen that has worked well during this crisis or pandemic from a risk perspective? I'll give you a couple of minutes if you can type some questions in there, or type in your comments there. What has worked well? An example that I'll provide while you're thinking and typing is that the CEO that I'm working with at the moment, every week he'll record a video and post it to the intranet, and we'll all get an email that's been written from the internal communications team around introducing the key concepts that the CEO is going to talk to us. So without having the ability to stand in town halls or in meetings, we're still getting that visual, that near one-on-one contact as best as we can. From my view, that's worked really well. There's been some fantastic feedback that the CEOs received by keeping that level of engagement there. Again, Vivi, I might just need you to read out some of those comments for me.
Hey, Andrew. So just go to the questions on your right side, chat, and press undock pin from control panel. So it should open up the questions box.
Oh, yeah.
For you. Yeah, just try it that way, and I think it will be a lot more easier for you to see. And guys, don't be shy. Just ask, type in your questions, everything that you have and are curious about, so that Andrew can answer it for you. Did you made it?
Yes.
Is it better now?
Yeah, I've done that, Vivi, but I still can't see anything, unfortunately. Yeah, I've just got the yeah, I'm just not able to pull that one up. I've got the chat box open and unpinned, but I'm not getting the full experience in terms of seeing what everyone's typing in.
Just go to the questions box.
Yeah, no, the specific questions box isn't popping up either. I've just got the chat box.
Yeah, we are experiencing some problem regarding that.
Yeah. That's okay.
You can circle around, and then we will come back later to the question.
Yeah, that's fine. So what I want to just run you through now is, just before we jump into those questions, sorry, my just one moment, is a call to action. So I want to give you 3 takeaways that you can take away from this webinar, in addition to the questions and answers that we'll go through shortly. So the 3 takeaways are: assess the effectiveness of your business continuity planning framework and assess how effective it has been over the past quarter. So there are a number of ways how to do this. So you can get everybody, the key staff, involved in what we call an after action report, which is a bit of a military term, but it's also like a post implementation review, or you might also just know it as a business continuity debrief. So whilst the COVID virus and the COVID scenario is not over yet, I would highly encourage you at least to get some of the key executives together to understand, do a bit of a stock take, how effective has our framework been that has allowed us to continue to operate in the current situation, and to maintain our current level of standards. The second one is around to conduct a review on how effective the risk framework has flexed. So often some organizations can see risk as very black and white and very binary. This is what we need to do, go and do it. Whereas what we know as risk professionals and practitioners is that risk is a daily activity. It changes on a regular basis. There's not any sort of really one particular risk that you can say, okay, succession planning, we've got a plan and we don't have to worry about it. That's not the case, and we know that. And so this is a really great tool to go back and use this to start the conversation with the executive and the leadership team to say, how have we collectively managed to respond and be agile to the current environment? You might want to start this conversation within your existing team. If you use the 3 lines model, you might have each of the different lines of defence have a workshop on their own and then bring it together at the end. Or you might start to get, if you use the business partner model, you might start to get a key stakeholder from each of the different and various business groups or business functions or units that you support, get them together to ask, have we been responsive? What's gone right? What's gone wrong? What happened that we didn't expect, that we didn't see, that we weren't prepared for? It's not calling out failures, it's actually calling out areas for improvement. And if you can do it now under the auspices of an after action report or a review of the flexibility of the framework, now is the time to do it. The other thing to call out is now's an ideal and opportune time to review the ICT or IT ecosystem using the following criteria: performance, security, reliability, and sustainability. There are almost 4 key headings that you can put on a big whiteboard and ask the questions to your staff, to the people in a hierarchy below you, at level and above you, and really get the IT teams to think about these 4 key criteria. Has performance been maintained? If it decreased, by what %? What can we do to make sure that doesn't happen again? Alternatively, has performance increased? Fantastic. Let's understand why and what can we do to replicate that. Security, we spoke about data, phishing and malware and data loss before. What's changed? Again, is it for the better? Is it for the worse? Or has it stayed the same? Reliability. Has all the core ecosystems and applications remained accessible by everyone that needs to access those systems? And sustainability. If we're locked down, if this pandemic goes on for another 2 months, 6 months, 12 months, can we maintain and be sustainable for that period of time? There are 4 key criteria that I would highly encourage you to start to measure against from that digital risk perspective. Bibi, that's the end of the formal presentation. Really love to hear from the guys and girls on the call today as to what their questions are. We've got some time set up for some questions, so it'd be great to get stuck into it.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, first I'd like to thank Tarek for sending me the test question. Yes, I received it. And I also received the other ones. So, okay, let's first start with, I think it's a very good question. What do you think the effects of COVID-19 will be on insurance prices, and how many years the effects will last?
Yeah, I'm working with an insurance company at the moment, and the actuarials are certainly running around trying to understand what this certainly looks like. From an insurance point of view, I think we need to really sort of break that up into chunks. So I think from a personal insurance point of view, so my own personal insurance, I'm expecting my health insurance, my life insurance to increase. And for the key drivers that the insurance companies will be starting to pay out more claims, so they'll need to start to reclaim some of that money elsewhere. From a commercial point of view, that's going to be interesting because that's where we can take a more risk-based approach and we can have more impact on mitigating and helping reduce our premiums from a commercial and work context. From an individual, I understand and appreciate that for my health insurance, I'm a number. I can tell them that I work from home, that I wash my hands for 20 seconds. That's not going to make a difference from a personal perspective. From a work perspective, we can, from our risk seats, we can drive a change in that. Part of that can be, you know, we spoke about organizational structure. We spoke about facilities in the offices. If we can start to say and have, if we can influence from that risk lens, what actions, what activities we have within that office, that's where we should start to be able to go back to our insurers to say, we have removed open plan, we're back into a partition workspace. We've got, you know, we've divided the workforce into two teams, A team and blue team. A team is never in the office at the same time that blue team is in the office. Blue team continually works from home where red team comes in. There's a lot of different mechanisms that we can put in place that we can use to help mitigate significant spikes in our insurance premiums.
Great. Okay, so I have another one for you. It's from Terence. He asks, how practical is scenario planning now with the current high levels of uncertainty?
Scenario planning has always been really important. The key aspect when you're starting to do scenario planning, though, is as tempting as it can be sometimes to jump onto the internet or Google and, you know, what are some top scenario plannings. The scenario planning that you do needs to be bespoke. It needs to be specific to you and your organization. As an example, using the big powerhouse of, say, Louis Vuitton, Moet Hennessy, the big luxury goods company, do they need to do scenario planning on data breaches? Yep, because I hold a lot of customer data. Would they need to do a scenario planning on their supply chain? Yep, most definitely. Would they need to do scenario planning on one of their IT systems? Yeah, of course. Have they been impacted one of the most by, we spoke about discretionary spending? Yeah. So would it be beneficial for an organization who relies on consumer spending to understand if there is such an event like a global pandemic or a war or something like that, or natural disasters? Yes, because of their income is really derived from a lot of discretionary spending. When we start looking at the likes of electricity companies or gas providers, would they need to run the same scenario planning as a luxury good manufacturer and retailer? No, not necessarily. Would they run similar scenario plannings? Yes. Natural disasters, pandemics, changing in spending for sure. The scenario planning on a food or beverage or a clothing or luxury item company will be different for if we were to run a scenario planning on a global pandemic, because for essential services, water, gas, electricity, telecommunications, those services still need to be provided. The scenario planning is we still need to provide the services and we're not getting the revenue, or we're supplying the services, or we're mandated by government to continue to supply the services with the reduced rate or under different circumstances. That's a scenario that would be specifically for them. But the scenario planning for a luxury goods company or a car company will be different, because the not being an essential service is that they won't necessarily have the same regulatory or legislative influence. With the pandemic, people are not going out and buying new cars and new suits and new handbags and luxury items, but there will always need to be electricity, gas, internet, water connections. So you can have the same scenario plan, but you need to be really specific into what it means for your organization.
Okay, so I like this question. So Murat says, were there many companies which included pandemic risk in their risk management before COVID-19?
Oh, that is the million-dollar question. Look, there certainly has been a lot of companies who have planned and who have prepared for issues like this. Naturally, a lot of those are around the health sector. So a lot of hospitals, hospital networks, pharmaceutical companies, and a lot of those what we call sort of secondary or allied health providers had a lot planned for that. A lot of organisations that work within the non-for-profit and the third world international development will have had plans around pandemics. The pandemics that they may have planned for might have been around malaria, Ebola. We had SARS several years ago. What's different is that this is a different pandemic. This is a different incident or instance that we're living in now. SARS and MERS is probably, and I'm certainly not across all of my infectious diseases, but from what I've read, SARS and MERS is probably the most closest linked virus or pandemic that we're experiencing now from a risk point of view. So if you were to do any planning now, you would look back on COVID, and you would also potentially look back on how we responded to SARS and to MERS. Those organisations that have had really good scenario planning in place, really good business continuity, disaster recovery plans, we'll start to see the impact of that soon, I believe. And a lot of that will be who's maintained that relationship with their customer, who's retained that relationship, that engagement with their clients. Some organisations have shut down. We spoke about going into a holding pattern. Those organisations will need to come back bigger and stronger and more aggressive because they haven't been liaising, they haven't been continuing that relationship with their customer. If you have, then it's that bond that we have between brand and between customer, between brand and client within an organization, that's remained to the best of its ability. So it's going to be challenging for some organizations to really come back, not necessarily financially, because they may continue financially, but to reach the levels that they were once at, that's going to be the challenge.
Thank you. Okay, so we have another question by Abdul Rahman. It's quite interesting one regarding the latest developments with COVID-19. He says, how did New Zealand win against the pandemic? And did you learn anything from their experience that you would like to share with us?
So New Zealand has been fantastic. Now, one of the reasons is their leader, and we need to acknowledge Jacinda Ardern. She has been a fantastic Prime Minister who has led New Zealand through quite a lot. They've had a terrorist incident, they've had major earthquakes, they continue to have earthquakes, then they've had the pandemic. One of the key learnings from New Zealand is they locked down, and they locked down really quick. Because of that level, and if I talk in risk term, that uncertainty was so strong, the unknown was so strong that they've gone, we don't know exactly what this looks like. We're not going to take the risk. We're going to manage the risk. How are we going to manage the risk? Let's lock down. Because the knowledge that they had at the time was how it was spread and how it was communicable. So how is the way that we can manage that? Let's lock down. And I believe that's worked really well. I read today that they've had, I think they're almost COVID-free, which has been fantastic, which is brilliant. And now we're talking about, having travel bubbles. As many might know, Australia and New Zealand are neighbours, but we're also like brothers and sisters. So are we going to have a bit of a bubble between where we can still sort of start to travel. A lot of it really has been strong leadership, the ability to make a hard decision, and as risk professionals, that's where we really earn our dollar. That's where we make our biggest benefit, is by providing the information to the decision makers on a risk-based approach.
Well, I truly hope we won't jinx New Zealand by talking about them being COVID-free.
No, because I want to go skiing, so I need New Zealand to be open.
To be open. That's awesome. Well, I hope you're gonna get your way, you know, and holiday.
Fingers.
So I have one question from Tarek. Maybe you already answered this one earlier, but I think it's good to circle back. He says, don't you think the work from home concept is going to impact the benefits of the employees by any way, like insurance and other allowances, especially if companies started considering such approach of employment?
Yeah. The office where you walk in, a reception, and there's a barista making you coffee, and there's a commercial kitchen bringing you lunch. Do we still need that old school, I need to impress and woo my clients anymore? Because we've all been working remotely for months and it's been working. The article was talking about, from a journalist's point of view, when I go back into my financial advisor or my accountant's office, and there's a big reception with a big view of the city skyline and beautiful artwork, and someone brings me coffee, he said, I'm just thinking of all the fees I'm paying that's paying for all of this. We'll start to see, I believe, a consumer or customer-driven change into some of that behaviour. Like, I'm not paying for you to have the office at the penthouse anymore because I don't get to see it and it's my money. That's going to be really challenging for a lot of organisations. Working from home is going to be different too. Working from home, I'm paying for my own electricity, my own gas for my heating, my own water, my own internet. How will that change in that employer-employee relationship? Will I start to receive an allowance to cover costs for that? I'm not sure. I'm not currently. I do know that I get a deduction on my tax that I can claim for that. But if I'm setting up my role permanently working from home, what will that relationship be? Will I get a proper desk? I mean, I have a proper desk, but if I don't, will I get a desk and a chair and a laptop delivered to my house to work from? Will I have an ergonomist come out and make sure that I'm sitting correctly? Will I receive an ongoing allowance to cover the costs of electricity, water and gas? That's not known at this stage. From my view, I think some people may already be have those conversations and be having those benefits. The other thing is, I work with a lot of people that just live in small apartments, in one-bedroom apartments. If you're expected to work from home, if you then go and get a two-bedroom apartment because you want a designated office space, who will cover that? Can you charge that back to work as an expense? Or would work give you an allowance, like some organisations give people a car allowance if they need to use their car for work? That's going to be part of that component I was talking about at the start, where we're talking around reprioritisation and restructuring. These are more conversations that we're going to be having more and more now, to say, I'm going to work from home, that's fine. There's a mutual benefit there for the company and for me. Let's talk about that benefit and how we can close that gap.
Thank you, Andrew. Oh, come on, guys. Now that I am finally seeing your questions, don't be shy. Just type in. Okay, so we're gonna go with my favorite one. I think what risk has the largest impact during COVID-19 that most organizations had not planned for or assessed? I really like that one.
Really great question. So one of the key components there is that a lot of organizations just weren't ready. So we spoke about scenario planning before, which was a really, really great question. A lot of organizations were, when you talk around business continuity, scenario planning, disaster recovery, a lot of people have thought about what does this mean if, as an example, in Australia, there's lots of fires and floods. Either part of the country's on fire or part of it's underwater. So what does it mean if we need to move offices? There's a lot of work built around, if we can't work from this space, let's go and work from this space. But there hadn't been a lot of work around if we all can't work, or if we all can't work from this space, if we all can't work from an office. A lot of time and effort is spent in making sure that our supply chain is secure. And some organizations will go back to their first supplier and seek assurance that their supply chain is suffice and stable. Some organizations will then go to their supplier to say, confirm that you've got these people's back and that the supply chain won't be interrupted. COVID's really been a challenge because we haven't really been able to do that. And the issue with it is that entire supply chains and networks have been affected by the restrictions, by isolation, by restrictions on trade, restrictions on people movement, internationally, domestic and locally as well. So the biggest risk I think that we missed or haven't managed, which I think we're definitely going to do a lot better now, is just the scope, and that we weren't ready for something of this scale.
Thank you. So next question is, Faisal says, how often does the company refresh its assessment of the top risks?
So a lot of that will be dependent on what your board or your executive are after. You will often have it in a very well-built, structured organization. You will have timelines where you need to review what those top risks look like. If you think about the top 10 risks, you might review those. Some organizations review those annually. Annually is it's too long. They should be reviewed more frequently than that. Where we get hung up and where as risk professionals we come up against some resistance is around the term reviewed. I'm working on that separation program at the moment. I've got my top 15 risks. I review those at a high level every week because the pace of the project or the program is so quick and my timelines are so small. From an organization, if you're looking at a big bank or a big insurance company or automotive, manufacturing, agriculture, health, whatever industry, if you've got a top 10, top 15 or top 20, whatever it is, those risks, as risk professionals, all of the sub-risks, all of the child risks that we work with, ideally should fit into those. So if we think about a family tree or a hierarchy structure, if we've got and these are our top 10 risks, all the risks below ideally should filter into those top 10 or top 15, top 20. And where we start to see changes in the day-to-day management of those smaller risks, they start to aggregate and start to drive that change in that parent risk or in that top risk. When we see those big changes and those material changes, we should review what those risks look like. They should be reviewed more frequently than annually. They should be almost reviewed more frequently than quarterly. It just depends on how you want to do that review. If you're in a business partner model, take your top 10 risks that relate to your business unit and go, guys, these are the top 10. I just want to quickly run a sense check through them. Let's just grab a coffee in an hour and just make sure that, you know, there's been no big material change. If you're in a 3 lines of defense model, all right, guys, line 1, line 2, let's get together and understand what this looks like. Has there been any change? Do we need to go back to the risk owners, the risk managers, to say, we think we need to make a change? Bring internal audit, bring internal audit into the conversation too. Is your strategic internal audit plan managing and assessing against these top 10 risks? If they're not, what are internal audit assessing? If internal audit are still running around completing audits on petty cash or office stationery expenses, as opposed to IT stability, IT security, you know, human resource succession planning at this time, then internal audit, I would question if they're doing their job. So there's a lot of alignment between what we do in our daily jobs as risk and compliance professionals into those top 10 risks. So you would almost then practically be reviewing those on a daily basis. You might not technically pull out your risk profile and review it, but everything that you do every day should filter back in to influence one of those top 10 risks.
Thanks, Andrew. Okay, I have a question. It's sort of my cup of tea. It's about book recommendations. So Abdul Rahman asked if you have any book or website you can recommend for a new risk professional. I think we have many here, many new, who are starting in the field.
Yeah, look, there's some really interesting literature out there. So, you know, first and foremost, it's about expanding your network. You will learn a lot from a risk professional's best item in your toolkit is your network. Quite often you'll need to confirm, talk to someone, bounce an idea off someone. The best platform for that's definitely going to be LinkedIn. Send me an invite. I'm more than happy to connect with you, and you'll get a lot of thought leadership and a lot of comments and ideas brought up on that platform. The other one is around the big 4 accounting firms and risk organizations. So PricewaterhouseCoopers, Deloitte, KPMG, and EY. They put out a lot of thought leadership and articles around risk and what that looks like. So jump on and have a look there. The other thing around your network is building your network, you know, whether it be on LinkedIn and in person and in your jurisdiction, but it's attending things like this. So, you know, you've got, you know, a webinar, you know, this one's, you know, cost neutral, which is absolutely fantastic of LEORON to organise. You might have some that you might have a small fee to pay. These are where you're going to get really good information. You're going to get a really good return on investment. You've also got some sort of short-term or shorter training packages. I know that LEORON offers quite a lot of training within those areas. I've run some before in the past. You'll get a lot of content from those. You can go and do some formal studies in like a postgraduate environment. So very theoretical. You want that practical knowledge. You want to be able to hit the ground running. You want to be able to take the knowledge from what you've learned today and go back and have that conversation tomorrow, which is why I've left that call to action slide in the background so you can copy that down or take a photo. So you can go back and say, guys, I had a conversation, spoke with some colleagues, we need to talk about this. In terms of books, I read quite a lot. A lot of those will really depend on what your area or what your industry is. I feel you can't really go wrong with reading some autobiographies, because you'll understand a lot about risk from particularly, you know, quite strong leaders. I'm reading a very interesting book at the moment on the Cambridge Analytica business and what happened in the US. It's a fantastic read. It's yeah, phenomenal how that's all happened. But just really cast your net wide, build your network, my friend, connect with people. You'll find a lot of people will love to talk and share their thoughts and advice. So just welcome it. Just be open to being involved in those conversations.
Awesome. Thank you, Andrew. Well, I think maybe we can later on also, you can write me a list. Maybe we can send it to them, or for anyone interested can just connect with us on LinkedIn or write us an email for the book recommendations if you weren't able to get it from what Andrew said.
Yeah, I'm also just finishing my book, so I'm just doing some final editing. It's a short book. It's on risk and strategy and how effective risk management will help an organization achieve its strategy. The best way to get that, I'm not charging for it. The best way to get that is connect with me on LinkedIn and just send me a note saying, hey, I attended your webinar, and when the book's ready to go, then it's an ebook, saving paper. I'll flick that out to you as well.
Oh, that's awesome. I want one copy for myself as well.
You want one as well?
Please count me in. Please count me in. Just sign it. I'm a big collector of books, so I really like.
Yeah, it's going to be an ebook, so I'll sign the PDF and send it over to you.
Yeah, please. You have to. Even a PDF version, I'll accept it.
Okay.
Thank you.
The other thing, just on that last question, is there's two books that I highly recommend. One is called The McKinsey Way, as in McKinsey is in the big consulting company. The McKinsey Way and the McKinsey, not the McKinsey Method, but there's another ebook as well. Again, if you want to inbox me on LinkedIn, I can send you the soft copies, electronic copies of those books. It's more of a consultant way in terms of how they break down questions and problems into solutions. If you apply a similar methodology in your risk conversations and your risk workshops, you are setting yourselves up for success.
Perfect. Thank you, Andrew. Okay, so next question. I'm gonna ask Tarek's question again. I feel like I owe him a favor because he did send me a test question to see if everything is working. So please bear with me. It's a little bit long. I try to read everything. So he says that during the pandemic, he believes that the lifestyle has been also changed, and he thinks that this would limit the business relations, networking. So he asked whether you have any tips or advices how to overcome this.
Yeah, look, I agree with 100%. I'm a member of a few organizations, the Risk Management Institute, the Governance Institute, and the company directors. There's a lot of organizations and networks that I'm involved in that we've had to move remotely. So we're holding committee meetings using similar platforms like a webinar, GoToWebinar, Zoom, Skype, and the like. Networking has become quite difficult because, normally my approach is, hi, Bibi, lovely to meet you tonight. Love to understand more about what you do. I'm not here to sell you anything. I just want to understand more about what you do and how I can potentially help you. Can I take you for a coffee? Well, we can't really do that now, and you're right, because it's more difficult. The truth is, I mean, I live in Australia, right? So it's hard for me to network with. There's a really good professional base here, but a lot of a lot of my network is actually internationally. We can still do that internationally. I think a lot of us at the moment are a little bit tired of having a virtual coffee, but you can organise a quick Zoom call, a quick Skype, or a quick GoToWebinar. Check in. Hey, can we just jump on a phone for or a teleconference for 15 minutes or for 10 minutes. Part of it is really around how you sell that concept. There's a really interesting book by Grant Cardone. He's a US venture capitalist. It's called 10X, or the Principles of 10X. It's about thinking big and making everything, you want one customer, think you want 10. He's got a very large social media presence. He's quite full on. He's got a lot of energy. Sometimes it's like, wow, man, just calm down. But
yeah, we've seen him on LinkedIn already. Don't worry.
Yeah.
I think everyone knows.
Yeah, but it's interesting because the principle is there. Like, if I want to get to know Bibi and understand more about what you do and how we can work together, then what's my proposition? And when we're building networks, you need to do the same too. You need to be able to say, look, hi, I'm new to risk. I'm really keen to learn more. Can I have 5 minutes of your time or 10 minutes for a quick call just so I can pick your brain? Can we have a virtual date, a virtual 10-minute coffee or something similar? A lot of it is also just being brave and being courageous to say, hi, I'm new, I'm looking to expand, I'm looking for a mentor. I really love what you've done. Do your research. I love what you did with this. I saw your post on LinkedIn. I saw your post on or your article in this newspaper or journal. I would love to understand more about it. Are you available next week on Wednesday between 9 and 5 or 9 and whatever? A lot of it is being proactive and being the sell. Give me a reason. Oh, sorry, don't give me a reason to say no. Give me the reason to say yes. Hi, Bibi. Loved your presentation tonight. Loved, you were highly organised.
Tips, guys. Take some tips so you can write to me later.
But you can go. Really loved it. Would really love to understand how you got such a large bunch of people together. Are you available next week on Thursday between 10 and 11 for a coffee? 10 minutes. Just really keen to understand. You're more likely to say yes than that than if I flick you an email and go, hey, Bibi, would love to talk to you about a presentation. I'm going to go, yeah, I don't have a huge amount of time. But if you go, if you've done your research, if you give them a reason to say, have the default response yes. You want to be able to sell. And I say sell because you need to be able to, hi, I would like you to invest your time in me. So building the network, it's strong. It's about, how you do it. Have a really, really great, we call them an elevator pitch. You need to be able to tell me in 30 seconds or less what you're about. Not what you do, but what you're about. Because people will often be defined by their job title or their status or their role. That's fine. But tell people what you're about. Like, hi, my name's Andrew and I love risk management. And what I love about it is that with risk comes reward. And what I do is I help companies assess what that reward is and build that into a risk framework so organizations can seize that opportunity, because risk isn't always bad. Sometimes it's a good thing. And in that, where people start to get scared, that's where the growth is. And that's how I help companies. What about you? Tell me about what you do. You're more likely to get someone a bit more engaged if you can, express something about yourself as well.
That's nice, Andrew. I really like that one. I hope everyone listened to it, got some tips, wrote it down.
It was a good question.
Yeah, it was. Okay, so we have enough time for 2 or 3 questions. We'll make it 2. So Bassam says, as we know, in ISO 31000, it recommends that risk management activities should be integrated into organizations' processes. My question is, how do you make sure that risk owners will report all kinds of risks in transparent way?
So that's a really interesting question, because like I just said in my little intro, some people see risk as bad or scary, or we don't want to talk about it. So a lot of it will come down to your engagement model. So this is an area that I'm really big on, and that I've done some teaching on before as well. So Bibi, if you're my risk owner and I'm your risk business partner or your line one risk manager, what I'll do, and my engagement method, is to engage with you through various modalities. So we'll email, we'll talk on the phone, and where we can, I'll come and see you in person. So it's not just about every 2 months, every 6 months, you'll get an email from me saying, hi, any new risks to report. It's more of that ongoing relationship. So I can come to you to say, hey, how you going? I was reading the paper the other day. Did you see that one of our suppliers has had an issue? And if you hadn't, then I'm bringing you benefit and value by bringing this information to your attention. Alternatively, it's where we start to have that conversation where maybe you respond and say, I was thinking about that and what that looks like from our risk profile, or I was thinking about that and this is a potential risk for us. So where we talk about embedding those, you know, the 31,000 is a really great guide in terms of this is what, you know, the framework looks like. Our approach and how we embed that really comes down to the organization, and it comes down to the organization's appetite and the model, the engagement model, and the relationships that you have. The more and more that we work in risk, the more and more risk is a relationship business, because people will tell you what's keeping them up at night. People will tell you the big, fat, ugly risk that is just scaring them if they've got a relationship with you. But if you don't, they're going to be more reluctant to put that in an email to you. So it's that relationship that you've built, and how you continue to build that relationship to say, hey, I've just been talking to Mohammed in finance, and this project that we're doing, we don't have the funding for that, or we only have half of the funding. What are we doing from a risk point of view? Are we de-scoping? Are we delaying? Are we recutting the business case? Are we going up for more funding? You know, what are the options? So a lot of that will be around those relationships that you have. I've built this function called, or a method called the risk intelligence-led risk management. And it's where we implement the foundations or practices of intelligence that you would see within state security sort of organizations, and more of that sort of more of that level of intelligence into a risk decision-making model. So as risk practitioners, our best friends are our network within the organization as well, because that's where you start to understand how the different pieces of the puzzle come together. All of those pieces of the puzzle come into a big risk profile and will intersect with aspects of your risk profiles. So for me, it's really important that I have relationships with commercial, procurement, sourcing, finance, human resources, executive assistants, with all of the different people across the organizations, because that's where you'll start to get the pieces of the puzzle that will bring together what that risk or risks look like.
Awesome. Thank you. I think we have just enough time for one more question. I've saved the best for last. It says,
okay.
To what degree will automation, artificial intelligence, and robotics help reduce the people risk for future events?
Yeah, that's another really good question as well, Bibi. So I think what we're going to see is an increased reliance, or a lot of organizations starting to move faster, with a lot more pace and a lot more opportunity and a lot more appetite for risk around robotics, artificial intelligence, and automation. From an IT lens, we start to see a lot of really core IT applications like Amazon and Salesforce really start to dominate the market to say, this is the product, and then if you have existing databases or existing data sources or other applications, this is the API that we need to build to have them all talk to each other. Seeing that a lot within finance, financial services and insurance at the moment within Asia Pacific, where we'll go to one key platform and have all of the other platforms linking in like a data lake into a big data warehouse. After COVID, or soon, probably before the end of COVID, I'm expecting to see a really big shift in organizations saying, let's start to reduce the risk and liability on that human element. What can we set up by automation through robotics and also through other IT applications as well? My recommendation, if you're not across where the current state of artificial intelligence, robotics or automation is within your organization or within your industry, jump on, do some reading. Understand what that looks like from a digital point of view to an operational point of view. You want to understand how this change in digital is going to or potentially will impact your business and your broader industry, because what's going to happen to your business may or may not happen to your competition. So really lift your lens up, lift your eyesight up, understand from a context of your organization, and then understand from an industry point of view as well, because it's getting a lot more coverage and a lot more leverage. We're going to see a lot more of it.
Thank you, Andrew. Well, I think it's time for us to end the Q&A part. Do you have anything additionally to say?
Yeah, I would just like to thank everyone for jumping online today, and for LEORON for hosting this webinar, and Bibi, thank you for being our gracious host. It's been fantastic to work with you and being able to give me the opportunity to certainly present and share some thoughts, some insights, and hopefully trigger some questions that we can go back to work tomorrow and next week and really start to think about what this means in our own individual context. As I've said, guys, happy for you to hit me up on LinkedIn and to join there. Let me know that that we've met during this webinar, and if you're interested in me sharing any of those materials, I'm more than happy to do that as well. But I would just like to thank everyone for their time, and Bibi, thank you very much for yours.
My pleasure to be here. I want to thank everyone as well. Thank you, Andrew, too. I hope you enjoyed the webinar and that this was a very memorable and valuable experience for you. So I just wanted to remind you that our upcoming enterprise risk session is happening in just 4 days. So if you were on the lookout for a good risk management program, be sure to check it out. Please feel free to connect with me or connect with Andrew, whether on LinkedIn or email. I'm also here to help out with anything else. And I would also love to hear back from you and just catch up. So thank you again.
Well done.
Have a lovely day, guys. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Stay safe. Cheers.